The sound of metal against metal echoed through my garage workshop as I tightened the last bolt on Mrs. Henderson's transmission. It was nearly 6 p.m. on a Friday, which meant another week of hiding behind engine blocks and oil changes was coming to an end. My name is Staff Sergeant Michael Tank Rodriguez, though everyone in Millfield, Colorado just knows me as Mike, the quiet mechanic who keeps to himself and always has his German Shepherd by his side. Thor lay in his usual spot by the garage entrance, his dark brown eyes constantly scanning our surroundings with the alertness that never quite left him, even 3 years after we'd both retired from active duty. To anyone passing by, he looked like a regular pet, a beautiful black and tan German Shepherd with intelligent eyes and a muscular build. But Thor and I shared secrets that the good people of this mountain town could never imagine. We'd served 2 tours together in Afghanistan, where Thor had been trained as both an explosive detection dog and a combat assault dog. He'd saved more lives than I could count, including mine on multiple occasions. When an IED blast left me with a traumatic brain injury and severe PTSD, Thor had refused to work with any other handler. The military brass decided we'd earned our retirement together, and for 3 years we'd been trying to figure out what normal life was supposed to look like. The answer, I'd discovered, was that normal life was incredibly difficult for soldiers who'd seen too much. My apartment above the garage was sparse, just the essentials, nothing fancy. Thor's bed sat in the corner next to mine because the nightmares were still bad enough that I needed him close. During the day, he was my constant companion, helping me navigate the anxiety and hypervigilance that made simple things like grocery shopping feel like combat operations. Most people in town thought I was just overly attached to my dog. They didn't understand that Thor was my lifeline to sanity, my early warning system, my anchor to the present when my mind tried to drift back to the mountains of Kandahar. They saw a man who couldn't go anywhere without his pet. I saw a partnership forged in fire and blood that kept me alive one day at a time. The work was good therapy. Engines didn't lie, didn't judge, and didn't ask questions about the scars on my hands or why I flinched at loud noises. But evenings were harder. That's when the loneliness crept in, when the silence became too much, when I knew I needed to try to connect with other human beings or risk disappearing entirely into my own head. That's why, every Friday night, I forced myself to walk the 2 blocks to the Rusty Anchor Bar. Thor would lie on the porch outside, alert and watchful, while I nursed a single beer and tried to remember how to have conversations with civilians. The bartender, Jenny, was kind enough not to ask too many questions about why I never stayed longer than an hour or why my dog never left his post by the door. Tonight felt different, though. As I locked up the garage and clipped Thor's leash to his collar, something in the air made both of us more alert than usual. Thor's ears were pricked forward, his head slightly lowered in the stance that meant he was processing multiple threat assessments simultaneously. "Easy, boy," I murmured, running my hand along his back. "Just another Friday night." But Thor knew, the way he always knew, that tonight wouldn't be like the others. The Rusty Anchor was busier than usual when we arrived. The parking lot was filled with pickup trucks, a few sedans, and 5 Harley-Davidson motorcycles that immediately caught my attention. The bikes were all black and chrome, customized with extended forks and loud pipes, belonging to the kind of riders who wanted everyone to know they were there. Inside, the bar hummed with conversation and the click of pool balls. The Friday night crowd was a mix of local ranchers, construction workers, a few teachers from the elementary school, and a handful of men I recognized as fellow veterans, though we'd never spoken about our service. These were good people, working folks who'd accepted the quiet mechanic and his dog as part of the community fabric. The 5 bikers sat at a large round table near the back, their leather cuts identifying them as members of the Desert Serpents Motorcycle Club, They were loud, already several beers deep, and making the kind of comments that put everyone else in the bar slightly on edge. The leader was impossible to miss, a massive man with arms like tree trunks, a shaved head covered in tattoos, and the kind of cruel smile that meant he enjoyed other people's fear. I ordered my usual, a Coors Light and a bowl of water for Thor, who took his position on the porch where he could see me through the window. For 30 minutes, everything was normal. I made small talk with Jenny, nodded to a few regulars, and tried to blend into the background the way I'd learned to do. That's when the big biker decided I looked like entertainment. "Hey there, dog boy!" His voice boomed across the bar, silencing several conversations. "You mind if I ask you a question?" I looked up from my beer, already calculating distances to exits and potential weapons. "What's that?" What kind of grown man can't go anywhere without his little puppy? He stood up, revealing himself to be at least 6'4" and probably 300 pounds of muscle and attitude. I mean, is that thing your security blanket or something? His friends laughed on cue, the kind of laughter that encouraged bad behavior. Other patrons looked uncomfortable, but nobody spoke up. This was the moment I'd been dreading for 3 years, when someone would push too hard and force me to choose. Between backing down and revealing who I really was. "Just likes the fresh air," I said quietly, taking a sip of my beer and hoping he'd lose interest. But bullies never lose interest when they sense weakness. "Bull Martinez," he introduced himself, walking over to my table with the swagger of someone who'd never faced real consequences. "President of the Desert Serpents. And you are?" "Mike," I said, not offering my hand. "Well, Mike, me and my boys were just discussing how we don't see many men around here who need emotional support animals to function in society." He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, uninvited. "Makes us wonder what kind of trauma you've got that makes you so dependent on a dog." The word trauma hit like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. "Like I said, he just likes the fresh air." Bull leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "You know what I think, Mike? I think you're one of those broken soldiers we hear about on the news. The ones who come back all messed up in the head, can't handle normal life anymore. Leave respect in the comments if you think Bull was wrong to mock veterans, or confrontation if you think I should have stood up to him immediately. Don't forget to subscribe to see how this dangerous situation unfolds." The temperature in the bar seemed to drop 10 degrees. Several of the other patrons had gone quiet, and I could feel their eyes on us. Bull's friends had moved closer, forming a loose semicircle around my table like wolves closing in on wounded prey. "I don't want any trouble," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to flood my system. "Just trying to have a quiet drink." "See, that's the problem with you people," Bull continued, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. "Always trying to avoid confrontation, always hiding behind your sob stories and your therapy dogs. Real men don't need crutches to get through life." I could see Thor through the window, and his body language had changed. His ears were fully erect now, his body low and coiled. He could sense the tension even from outside, and his military training was beginning to override his civilian conditioning. "Maybe I should call your little friend in here," Bull said with a nasty grin. "See if he's as tough as his owner pretends to be, though I'm guessing he's just as soft as you are." That crossed a line I hadn't even realized existed. Insult me, mock my service, question my courage. I'd learned to live with all of that. But threatening Thor was something entirely different. That dog had saved my life more times than I could. Count had pulled me from burning vehicles, had stood guard over wounded soldiers while mortars fell around us. He deserved better than to be used as a prop in some biker's power play. "Leave the dog out of this," I said, and for the first time there was steel in my voice. Bull's eyes lit up with predatory interest. "Oh, now we're getting somewhere. The puppy lover has some fight in him after all," He reached across the table and grabbed my wrist, slamming my arm down on the wooden surface. How about we settle this like men? Arm wrestling. Winner gets to decide what happens to the loser's emotional support animal. The pain in my wrist was immediate and intense, but it was nothing compared to the rage building in my chest. This wasn't just about respect anymore. This was about protecting the one living creature who'd never failed me, never abandoned me, never treated me like I was broken beyond repair. "I'm not interested in games," I said through gritted teeth, trying to pull my arm back. But Bull's grip was iron, and his friends had moved even closer. "Wasn't asking if you were interested," Bull snarled, applying more pressure. "See, this is what happens when soft people come into hard places. They get reminded of their place in the food." "Chain!" The pressure increased until I could feel bones grinding together. Around us, the bar had gone completely silent. Even the jukebox seemed to have paused between songs. This was the moment when someone should have intervened, when Jenny should have called the police, when the other veterans in the room should have stood up for one of their own. But nobody moved, nobody spoke, and Bull Martinez continued to twist my arm with the satisfaction of someone who'd never been challenged by anyone stronger than himself. That's when we all heard it. From outside, clear as a church bell and twice as commanding, came a sound that froze every person in that bar. Not a regular bark, not the kind of noise a pet makes when it's excited or playful. This was different, military, different. It was sharp, authoritative, and carried with it the unmistakable tone of a war dog, announcing that the situation had just changed dramatically. Bull's grip loosened slightly as he looked toward the window, confusion replacing the cruel satisfaction on his face. What the hell was that? But I knew exactly what it was. Thor had just switched from civilian companion mode to combat operational status. That bark was his warning call, the sound he made when he identified a threat that required immediate tactical response. It was a sound I'd heard echoing across Afghan mountains, cutting through gunfire and explosions, announcing that one of America's most lethal four-legged weapons was about to go to work. The real question wasn't what had made that sound. The real question was whether Bull Martinez and his desert serpents were ready to meet the other half of our team. The best part of this story is coming up next. Make sure you subscribe, because what happens when a combat-trained military working dog decides his partner is in danger will leave you speechless. The second bark was different from the first. Where the initial warning had been sharp and commanding, this one carried a deep, resonant threat that seemed to vibrate through the building's walls. Every veteran in that bar recognized the sound immediately. It was the battle cry of a dog, trained not just to detect bombs, but to eliminate threats with extreme prejudice. Bull's friends were looking nervous now, glancing toward the windows with the kind of uncertainty that comes when you realize you might have misjudged a situation. But Bull himself was too committed to his performance to back down. Even as sweat began to bead on his forehead. "Your mutt's got quite a set of lungs," he said, tightening his grip on my arm again. "Too bad he's stuck outside while his master gets taught some manners." But the third bark never came. Instead, there was silence. The kind of absolute quiet that precedes violence, when predators stop announcing their presence and start moving with lethal purpose. Anyone who'd spent time in combat zones would recognize that silence. It meant the negotiation phase was over. Through the window, I could see Thor's silhouette moving with fluid precision across the porch. His head was low, his movements economical and purposeful. He'd switched into what the military called hunt mode, the mental state where a combat dog becomes less pet and more weapon, guided by years of training in neutralizing threats to his human partner. "Mike," Jenny called from behind the bar, her voice tight with worry. "Maybe you guys should just—" She never finished the sentence because that's when the front door of the rusty anchor bar exploded inward. Thor didn't charge through like an angry pet defending his owner. He entered like what he was, 85 pounds of German Shepherd, trained by the finest military dog handlers in the world, conditioned by combat in one of the most dangerous theatres of war on earth, and bonded to his human partner by experiences that most people couldn't imagine. The attack, if you could call it that, was a thing of beauty and terror. Thor moved with surgical precision, targeting Bull's weapon arm, the one twisting my wrist, with the kind of tactical thinking that had made him legendary among Special Forces units in Afghanistan. His teeth locked onto Bull's forearm just above the wrist, not to maim or kill, but to apply exactly the right amount of pressure to force the immediate release of his grip. Bull screamed and let go of my arm, but Thor wasn't finished. Using momentum and leverage techniques that had been drilled into him during 2 years of advanced combat training, he guided Bull's massive frame to the floor with an efficiency that would have made his handlers proud. The entire sequence took less than 5 seconds. From door to takedown, Thor had moved like a professional soldier, neutralizing a threat, then immediately positioned himself between Bull and me, his body language making it clear that further aggression would be met with escalated response. "Jesus Christ," one of Bull's friends whispered. "What the hell kind of dog is that?" But the answer came from an unexpected source. In the corner booth, a grizzled man in his 60s stood up slowly. He was wearing a Vietnam veteran's baseball cap and had the bearing of someone who'd seen his share of combat. "That's a military working dog," he said quietly, his voice carrying the respect of someone who understood what he was looking at. "Combat trained, multiple deployment veteran. By the look of him, he studied Thor's stance, the controlled aggression, the tactical positioning. Son, that's no pet. That's a war dog." Other veterans in the bar began to stand as well. There was Tom Henderson, who'd done 3 tours in Iraq, Sarah Mitchell, Army medic who'd served in Kosovo, Dave Rodriguez, Marine who'd been at Fallujah. One by one they rose from their seats as recognition dawned. "The way he moves," Tom said, wonder in his voice. "The precision, the control. I've seen dogs like this in Baghdad. They don't make mistakes. They don't back down. And they sure as hell don't let anyone hurt their handler." Bull was still on the floor, clutching his arm and staring up at Thor with something between fear and disbelief. The dog stood perfectly still, alert but not aggressive, waiting for either a stand-down signal from me or further threatening behavior. "Oh, from Bull, he could have killed you," I said quietly, finally finding my voice. "Everything you've heard about military working dogs being weapons. It's all true, but he didn't. He used exactly the force necessary to neutralize the threat and stop there. That's not pet training, that's military discipline." I reached down and placed my hand on Thor's head, feeling the tension in his muscles beginning to ease as he recognized that the immediate danger had passed. "Easy, boy. Stand down." Thor relaxed slightly, but remained positioned between Bull and me, his eyes never leaving the big biker's face. Years of combat experience had taught him that threats could re-emerge without warning, and his job was to be ready. 2 tours in Afghanistan, I continued, looking around the bar at faces that were now seeing me clearly for the first time. Thor here was assigned to my unit for explosive detection and combat assault. We cleared IEDs from village roads, searched compounds for weapons caches, and when things got bad, he pulled wounded soldiers to safety under fire. Sarah Mitchell stepped forward, her medic's training making her automatically check Bull's arm for serious injury. "How many saves?" she asked me. "Officially, 47 lives saved through explosive detection." "Unofficially?" I shrugged. "Thor's been present for every major engagement my unit faced. He's earned 3 commendations for valor and has never failed to complete a mission." Bull was sitting up now, cradling his arm, but apparently unaware that he'd just been handled by one of the most elite combat dogs in military history. "I could sue you," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "For what?" Dave Rodriguez laughed. "Your dog attacked me while I was assaulting someone in a public establishment? Good luck with that legal strategy." Jenny had come around the bar with a first aid kit, but Sarah waved her off. "He's fine, bruised ego more than anything else. Your dog knew exactly what he was doing." That's when it hit me. For 3 years, I'd been hiding in plain sight, pretending to be just another damaged veteran with an emotional support animal. But Thor and I weren't broken. We weren't weak. We were exactly what we'd always been. A military team. A partnership forged in combat. 2 professionals who'd served with honor and distinction. The only difference was that now everyone else could see it too. Bull's friends helped him to his feet, and it was clear that their evening of intimidating locals was over. The big biker looked at me with something that might have been respect or possibly fear. "This ain't over," he said, but the words carried no real threat. "How do you intimidate someone who's faced Taliban fighters with IEDs and survived multiple combat deployments?" "Yeah, it is," I replied calmly, "because now you know who we are. And the next time you see a veteran with a service dog, you'll remember this moment and think twice before assuming they're weak." As Bull and his crew filed out of the bar, the atmosphere began to shift. Veterans who'd never spoken to me before came over to introduce themselves. Civilians who'd only known me as the quiet mechanic started asking questions about my service. Thor, sensing that the threat had passed completely, allowed children to pet him for the first time since we'd arrived. "In town? Why didn't you tell us?" Tom Henderson asked. "We've got a whole veterans group that meets every month. Support network, guys who understand what you've been through." I looked down at Thor, who was now accepting scratches behind the ears from Jenny while maintaining his alert posture. "We've been figuring out how to be civilians," I said, "trying to leave the war behind." "The war's always with us," Sarah Mitchell said gently, "but that doesn't mean we have to carry it alone." She was right. For 3 years, Thor and I had been hiding from our past, pretending we were something we weren't. Tonight had shown me that there was another way. A community of people who understood sacrifice, who respected service, who wouldn't judge us for the skills we'd learned or the bond we'd forged in combat. "There's something else," I said, making a decision that had been 3 years in the making. "I've been thinking about starting a program, training service dogs for other veterans, helping match them with handlers who need what Thor gives me." The idea had been percolating for months, but I'd never had the courage to voice it. Tonight had given me that courage. "This town could use something like that," Jenny said from behind the bar. "We've got a lot of veterans around here, some struggling more than others." Dave Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. "I know at least 5 guys who could benefit from what you're talking about. Dogs trained not just for emotional support, but for real tactical assistance." "Combat-trained dogs for combat veterans," I said. "Partners, not pets." Thor looked up at me with those intelligent brown eyes, and I swear I could see approval there. This was our mission now, not clearing roads of IEDs or searching compounds for weapons, but helping other warriors find their way back to life with partners who understood what they'd been through. As the evening wound down and the last customers filtered out, Jenny refused to let me pay for my beer. "Heroes drink free at the Rusty Anchor," she said with a smile. Walking home under the Colorado stars, Thor padding silently beside me, I realized that tonight had changed everything. We were no longer hiding from our past. We were building a future on it. Sometimes the most important battles aren't the ones we fight overseas. Sometimes they're the ones we fight to find our place when we come home. And sometimes the best weapon we have in that fight is the loyalty of a friend who's never let us down, even when we've forgotten how to believe in ourselves. What do you think about the bond between veterans and their service animals? Have you ever witnessed the incredible training and intelligence of military working dogs? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts on how we can better support our veterans and their 4-legged partners. These stories remind us that heroes come in all forms, and sometimes the strongest among us are those who've learned to rely on each other, Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories about courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the most challenging circumstances.